Welcome to the RealTea podcast, brought to you by Tennessee Realtors and sponsored by Rule First, helping you live closer to what matters. I'm your host, Angela Shields. This podcast is created for Tennessee Realtors to get the tea on all things real estate in Tennessee. We'll bring you engaging conversations with esteemed guests in the real estate industry and cover a wide array of topics, including current events, governmental affairs, education, and legal updates. We are excited today to have a familiar face back with us, Addison Russell. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Addison is with Farah Bates and Barexa. She is our legal counsel and always excited to talk about our contracts.
Such an exciting topic, yes.
It's an important topic.
It is. No, it really is.
It really is. So I can't ask you about what is in your teacup, so we took them away.
Okay, yeah. I kind of blew my one tea drink there. But.
You did that once before. So how's your summer going?
It's going really well, but it's just really busy. All good things busy, but just really busy. What about your summer, Connery?
My summer is busy as well. Work, it seems like we're supposed to slow down,
right.
But we're not slowing down.
I always think that that's supposed to happen. And then I'm like, oh, my kids are going to be home and it's going to be great. And then it's just like all of it.
Well, they make you twice as busy when they're out of school. Right. Well, let's just jump into it. So we are in the middle of summer. Everybody is using the contracts, and we get a lot of questions about vendors. So I'm going to start with our vendors and ask you the question about what makes a licensed vendor for us.
Okay, and so when we're talking about vendors, it's kind of these platforms that members are getting their forms through. And so we have a copyright licensing agreement that we have any interested vendor review and look over, and we'll go through discussions and they sign it. And so that's really what makes them a vendor. But it's sort of like the forms are a product of Tennessee Realtors, and they're for a benefit of membership.
Yeah.
So much like if we were a singer and we have songs, that's the product. And so if someone wants to play those songs, they get licensed. And so we are licensing our forms to these vendors so that they can provide it back to our members as a benefit. But that licensing agreement is what makes them a vendor through Tennessee Realtors.
Just a lot of time has gone into putting that packet of materials together to make sure they were legal, accurate, up to date.
Yes, I can attest. A lot of time has gone into that.
And years. I mean, it's years. It's not like they were just written.
No.
It's a lot of time, a lot of study. You guys stay up on it tremendously.
Well, thanks. Yes, and a lot of just as things come out, then new things go into the form. So like I said, it is just a lot of time. It's not a stagnant item. It's a very dynamic item. And so we want to make sure that we are providing those forms to our members, but also giving them options. And that's why we have a variety of vendors available for them to use. So maybe, one platform isn't everyone's cup of tea. See what I did there? So we want to give options. And that's why if there isn't a vendor interested, we're always happy to talk with them and go through this negotiation so that they can provide those forms to our members.
Right. But we do require the agreement to be signed because, like you said, it is copyright, and we want to make sure that they are used properly and not just thrown out there on the website for anybody to grab. We actually had a company, I'll call them, steal our contracts here recently that you had to call and say, take those down.
I did. And we weren't the only victims, right. I guess. They had went through multiple state associations across the country and just thought that they would copy and paste the forms and then put them out on their website and then they were selling it as a benefit, but there was no licensing there. And that's what, we are, like you said, we're making sure the forms are being used correctly. And so that our users, our members are protected, but then also protecting the benefit to the association.
We found through that process that we had agents' listings that were going up on that site, and they had no idea it was even going up on that site as well, which is really sad.
Yeah.
Really?
Right. We're not all doing this for fun.
No. Well, and you're responsible for the data that's going on.
Right.
So it's terrible.
Have control.
But we did send out to our members at that time that if you happen to see our contracts that are out there and, they're not supposed to be, we have a way of reporting that. Or if you happen to see someone who's using way outdated material, you can report that as well. And so we will take care of that.
Yeah. We send out cease and desist letters. And if you get a cease and desist letter from me or my office, it's not meant to intimidate you or to think we're trying to keep written record. And so when forms are misused either by these big companies or even if we had a member that was using like an outdated form, which is contradictory to the licensing agreement, you'll get one of those. Don't be alarmed. Like it's all fixable. And I'm happy to have any conversations with anyone that does get those.
Yeah. So the vendor does sign the agreement. If a broker were to have a vendor they'd like to use, what's the process for that?
So they can contact John Crawford, who is the staff liaison with Tennessee REALTORS, and he can start those conversations. Then it will come to me, and I will send over a licensing agreement to them for them to sign. And sometimes their legal staff will get involved, and we'll talk through things. But that's kind of the process. Like I said, we're happy to provide more options to our members. So if you have a vendor you want to use, certainly don't hesitate to connect them.
We have a lot of vendors now that have signed this agreement. I mean, we have our platform that we provide as a member benefit, but we have a lot of vendors now.
Yeah.
Like 8.
I think that there's going to be a list somewhere.
Yeah, we'll put the list up in the chat.
But no, there's definitely a lot. And I feel like, honestly, in recent years, we just keep getting more as I think more platforms come to the market and are interested in, connecting with our members through that.
That's right. So we get the question a lot that if someone just wants to use their preferred platform and they don't happen to be a vendor, is it even possible?
Definitely. As I said earlier, these vendors are as a benefit to our members. So as you said, we have one that we provide, I guess, within your membership fee to our members to use, and that's a big member benefit. But we want to provide options. And so that's why we have these other vendors that we enter into licensing agreements with. But just because those are a benefit to your membership doesn't mean you're restricted to just using those. You can absolutely use a platform that does not have a licensing agreement with us. However, it's going to look a little different for the member. When we enter into these licensing agreements, they get our whole library of forms. And then every time we update forms, they get those updates as well. And they go in and put them in the system for our members to use. And it's already pre-printed with their name at the bottom, our members. And so all our members have to do is get on their system and all the forms are there. If you're using a non-licensed vendor, that's your responsibility as the member of the association to upload your own forms. And that can be very time consuming because we do have a variety of forms available. And so that member will have to upload all their forms. It's not as simple as, one person in the brokerage doing it for the whole brokerage because your usage of the forms are tied to your individual membership.
Right.
And so they're going to have your name at the bottom. So when I log on, it should say Addison Russell, and I'm going to pull all of those forms that say Addison Russell, and I'm going to upload them into my platform of choice. As you know, we publish all of our new forms come out on January 1, and they'll have the date, the bottom there, January 1, and whatever the newest year is. So if that's how you want to spend your New Year's Day, then you are welcome to do that. But that is the benefit of using a licensed vendor is that they're doing that work for you.
Well, and there's times throughout the year that we have to make changes throughout the year. It's not just January 1 sometimes.
Right. And so, it's not just a once a year thing. As I said, in fact, we just rolled out 3 new forms, and they're not new, but updated forms on July 1st of this year. 2 of those because of statutory changes at the state level. And then one was based on model changes at the EPA. And so now there are 3 forms out there that are going to have July 1st, 2025 updates. And if you go back to last year, we also did a mid-year forms release based on the NAR settlement. And so that's something that, as a member, if you're using that unlicensed platform, you really have to stay on top of and know that these new forms are out there and that you need to upload them into your system.
Right. So let's kind of jump into, because you kind of segued into it for me. So let's kind of jump into how we do update forms and how our whole library works, because it's not that you're sitting around and just decide, hey, this would be a great idea. It's you work very closely with what I would call like an advisory group.
Yeah.
So we have the residential forms. We call it a committee, but they're not the one actually writing the forms.
No, I always akin the forms committee to a client. If I have like an interior designer approach me about doing their vendor contracts, I've written a lot of auction contracts. And so if an auction company approaches me, I work with the client to understand, okay, what's your business model? Like, what are your needs? What are things you're encountering? Mm-hmm. And then I draft them. So that's kind of what the forms committee is. They're the client providing advice, but then the attorney, me, is drafting them and writing them and making sure they're compliant with statutes and the Brokers Act and truck rules and all those good things in general contract law. And so that's kind of how it works. And then the forms committee, it's also it's a yearly thing because, as I said before, the forms aren't stagnant; they're very much dynamic. Mm-hmm. And so if any member has an issue that comes up on a forms that say, I was in this transaction and nowhere in the forms did it talk about this. Is this something that should be included in the forms? That's something the forms committee can, as a group, kind of say, well, how many people are encountering? Like, how common is this, or how odd is this? And are our forms working mm-hmm. with today's market? Because if we had written a form, I've seen forms or contracts that were written in like the 50s and 60s, and it's so different from today. So I think you have to keep up on that dynamic energy to make sure that the forms are reflecting the market. And I don't sell real estate. So as you said, I'm not sitting around thinking, oh, I bet today somewhere across the state, someone had this issue and I'm going to put it in there. But that's where the client piece, them acting as the client, really comes into play.
Right.
Play on that.
So it's very member driven because mm-hmm. you're getting their feedback, but you're taking on that legal piece and writing it as an attorney. And then we have a couple of attorneys that volunteer their time that also give you just a second look at it.
Yeah. And then actually those attorneys are title attorneys too, which is very helpful because then they see that end of the transaction that maybe our members don't see as mm-hmm. closely. And kind of understand that piece. And then it's always helpful. And we've actually had a couple members of the forms committee that have been attorneys recently. And so that's really helpful too. And, the different insights that everyone brings. But again, I just kind of relate them to being like the client, and having communication with the client is always important.
Yeah. The other interesting thing I hear sometimes is, well, California does it this way, or Florida does it this way, or Texas does it this mm-hmm. way. And I think the other piece of this to remember is that we're very specific to Tennessee law. And that's what we're looking at. You may hear things that work in other states, and that's great. And maybe in practice it could work, but we're very specific to Tennessee law. And that's where you really hone in on.
Yeah. And actually, we had several examples recently, I think at our last meetings. Someone sent in a form suggestion, and I can't even remember what it was, but it was like, well, I think we should do this, XYZ. And it's like, well, but the Brokers Act and state law says we can't do that. So, that's where that conversation ends, or especially on commercial forms, which we've been looking at lease agreements lately. Most of that is laid out in state law in the Landlord-Tenant Act. So you are kind of it's also why we're very different as a country. It's based on those state laws. And then I think the markets are different too, and anyone would tell you that as well, that practices in multi-jurisdictions.
Rule First not only lends rule, but lives rule too. And as a cooperative, they can offer products and services other lenders aren't able to. From construction to land loans to financing homes in the country, They'll walk you through the process to make your rural dreams a reality. And because community matters, they're committed to investing in the communities they're a part of. Learn how you can get closer to what matters at ruralfirst.com. Rural First is a registered trademark of Farm Credit Mid-America, NMLS 407249. Equal housing lender, loans subject to approval and eligibility.
Let's talk about liability for a little bit. I'm sure you've seen where the contracts might have been challenged or something like that in courts. Do you have experience where you can talk about our contracts in that respect?
Yeah. Fortunately, I don't litigate. So I'm happy to not have too much experience with that. But our firm does do a lot of E&O defense. Mm-hmm. And through several conversations with those members, I'm sure our listeners know, but realtors or real estate licensees, they get sued all the time. Mm-hmm. And anytime a transaction goes south, they're getting named or the seller's getting named. But I'm really excited. I think actually one of our partners, Laura Hyatt, is going to come to TNsights and talk to the brokers and provide examples of when the forms have saved the licensee from liability in this situation. And that's also I think we get some feedback a lot of times that the forms are so long.
Yeah.
And, yes, they're not one page, but that's because they're comprehensive and they're long for a reason. And so we obviously, our goal is to protect our members, but then also to protect the consumers. And so that's what the lengthiness of the forms help to do is when problems arise, and, problems do arise, that there's either a step-by-step of this is what happens, or we're helping protect our members from liability, and then also the consumers from any unwanted liability that they didn't, bring on themselves.
Right, because it's not like you're selling a couch. You're selling something that's extremely valuable.
Yes.
And so you do need that protection.
And that people get very emotionally attached to as well. And so, with emotions come lawsuits. Often a lot of lawsuits are done, mainly filed just in principle alone. So you want to make sure that you are dotting your I's and crossing your T's for a reason. Those forms are there to protect you and to protect your consumers. And so, our firm stands by those forms. And I think, the association does as well.
Yes. And it just seems like that everybody's suing everybody today. So we definitely appreciate all that goes into creating those forms. And we do understand that brokers certainly have the right to create their own forms or add to the forms that we have, and we appreciate that that they have that right. By no stretch of the imagination are we trying to say that these have to be the forms of the state, and we dictate that. So, but we do see the benefit that comes with having a statewide form.
Yeah, and I think that it goes back much like the vendors that we talked about. Mm-hmm. The forms we put out are a benefit of membership, and they're put out to be a benefit of membership, but they are not mandatory, as you said. We're not trying to restrict, every licensee across the state to use those. And so it's really just a member benefit. And I personally think Tennessee is really lucky to have statewide forms. I know a lot of other states kind of maybe do it by jurisdictions, if they have them at all. But I think that that's just really helpful because, they are written, as you said, mostly pursuant to state law. And so other things that really carry from Memphis to Bristol.
Well, especially just using your firm as an example, working with us, you are the ones who stay up on when the state laws change. Yeah. And you brought up a great point when the federal issues come up, like with the EPA. It's you change them immediately.
Right. And so that's... I think that's also just the benefit of the forms. I'm obviously keeping up with state law changes, so that's easy, and we're putting those into action. And then such a benefit of being affiliated with NAR is when the EPA did their model forms change, they're communicating that down to us. Or with the NAR settlement, we had a big package change there, and so, but I'm very much in the know about all of those things that are happening, and because the committee is dynamic. We're making changes Whereas other clients that maybe hire me to draft contracts for them, that's sort of the extent of our relationship. They come to me, I'll draft the contracts, and then they take those and they use them. And I'm not actively updating their agreements unless they come back with that request, but based on the extent of our relationship. So I think that is such a benefit to having these forms that you can rest assured someone is, checking them and updating them and making sure that our members are staying in compliance with everything.
Staying on top of them.
Yes.
So I know that you get a lot of questions, especially on the hotline, about the 3 main composition options for agents and consumers, and especially how to use them in the forms. Mm-hmm. Do you mind kind of going through that a little bit?
Yeah. And I think that that's such a great forms question because, we do have a large library of forms. Mm-hmm. And that's understanding that not all transactions are the same. And so we provide different forms and different verbiage to use in each of those. So when it comes to compensation, there are, as you said, 3 main types of compensation. One is cooperative compensation. And so if you wanted to use that after talking with your seller and, an agent decided that's the best route to go, you can simply fill in the listing agreement to reflect that. So it would have like a total that goes to the listing agent. And then of that total, how much can be offered to share with a buyer's agent. And then we have a compensation agreement that is separate that will reflect that amount. Another option for compensation is where the seller is willing to compensate the buyer's agent directly. So if after talking to the seller, you decided that was the route you were going to go, you would put that in the listing agreement. I, seller, am willing to compensate you, Angela, my listing agent, X apples, X dollars, however, X percentage, however, you want to pay that. Mm-hmm. And then can say, I'm willing to consider offers where the buyer's agent is asking me to compensate them. And we now have language in the RF 707 that can be inserted into the contract that will accomplish that. I want to come, actually, while we're here talking about that, NAR does have, this is a question I get a lot from the hotline, can you put compensation in the contract? And the answer is yes, you can. Obviously, I put out language there, so that is yes. But NAR has said that is completely fine. It does not conflict with Standard of Practice 1616. That it can go in the contract, and so we now have that as a tool available for members who want to use. And then finally, the third compensation option would just be that I, seller, compensate my listing agent. And then the buyer is responsible for compensating the buyer's agent. That can be accomplished in our forms, again, very easily. You would just put an amount on the listing agreement that goes to listing agent, mark that you're not willing to participate in cooperative compensation. And then the buyer's rep form would have that amount in the buyer's rep form. So there have always been options to compensation, and that remains true in all of our forms. We're trying to provide for all those options out there, whether brokerages are using different models or, consumers have different needs. And so all the options are there, and just kind of really want to make sure that everyone knows about all those options. And that is a question that I am still getting on the hotline, because I think that, especially if you are at a brokerage that's still doing cooperative compensation, and that's perfectly great. That's perfectly acceptable. But you encounter maybe someone that's not willing to accept cooperative compensation. And then I get that question of okay, now how do I make this happen? Or can I do this? And it's yes, we can figure this out.
Do you ever get questions about what if I run across a company who's not willing to accept an agreement on a particular form?
A little bit. I think that there are some brokerages that aren't doing cooperative compensation, so will not use the compensation agreement and would rather any talk of that be in the purchase and sell agreement. I think if that's what everyone involved once that you're having educated talks with the consumers, because that's really what's important, is making sure the consumers are aware about their options. It that can happen, and it can go in the contract, and that's perfectly fine. So, but that's kind of the only thing I've been getting on the forms in that regard.
That's fine. When you mentioned some of the updates for this mid-year, can you go back through those again?
Yeah. So one of them is the lead-based paint disclosure form, and that's the EPA model form that changed. The change on the model form, it now includes a line that says buyer's agent has made seller aware of their responsibilities under the Lead-Based Paint Disclosure Act. This was very confusing to a lot of people, and understandably why. Because they're like, well, why would I, the buyer's agent, have to let the seller know that? So there is a footnote now, and this footnote was on the EPA model form too, that says this only applies if buyer's agent is being compensated by seller. Still getting the question of, well, if they have a listing agent, why is it my responsibility? But this is most often seen if you're dealing with a for sale by owner situation. You as the buyer's agent do have a statutory duty to make that seller aware that they need to fill out this lead-based paint disclosure form, among other things. Mm-hmm. It could be triggered if the listing agent has not made the seller aware for whatever reason, and the seller is compensating you. You need to make sure that the seller is signing this form and is aware of their obligations. So that's kind of how that happens. But the new form on that, it does include the footnote, which hopefully helps to answer some of those questions. I'm getting that question on the hotline a lot, though. The other two forms surrounded the wholesaling legislation that came out this year. The two forms that were updated was the RF 656, the notification form, and the RF 707, which is our additional contract language form. But the legislation from 2025 talks about wholesaling. It defined what wholesaling was. I mean, I think the real estate community uses that term a lot, but it wasn't a legal term, and now it is. And so that's if I approach you and offer to buy your house, but I intend to then sell it to another person. So that's defined in law, and then also disclosures were included in that legislation. And I will say that was legislation brought by Tennessee REALTORs, right. And it was kind of just to promote transparency to consumers. And so making sure that you, the original seller, are aware of my intentions, and then also that the subsequent purchaser knows who I am, that I don't own the house. I own a contract that I can assign to them. So those disclosures were, I have to let you, the seller, know that I intend to sell the property to a subsequent, or sell my contractual interest to a subsequent purchaser. And so we added that disclosure on the 707. So those can be, if you're working with a client who's engaged in this type of practice, you can put that language in your offer form to satisfy that requirement. And then I have to let the subsequent purchaser know that I'm not the true owner of the property. That's also in the 707. And so when we're negotiating that contract, I need to make that disclosure to them. And then also I have to, once I get the subsequent purchaser to agree to that, I have to come back to you, seller, and let you know I've assigned my interest 3 days prior to the effective date of the assignment. And so that provision went on the RF 656, the notification form. So that's kind of an overall view of what happened there this mid-year.
And then the committee is still working, even though that work's been done. So they continue to work and accept new ideas, or as you said, if anybody runs into anything, then that can be submitted to the committee for consideration.
Yeah. And we get a lot of questions about, or ideas from members, like what should be in that part about what's included in a home sale, or should this be included or should this not be included? So it's just people that are coming across transactions and something has, not gone wrong, but something has come up.
Right.
And so it's like, well, is this common enough that we would put it in a form, or you also can't put everything in a form. That probably doesn't make sense, but that's what the committee is looking at how they can best work for our members.
Right. So any other topics that have been coming up on the legal hotline or anything that come to mind for you?
Just the lead-based payment disclosure one for sure, especially after, this mid-year forms release. Everyone is kind of like, well, tell me more. Mm-hmm. And I will say the EPA has not put out guidance on that with it. They put out this model form, but there's no official guidance. But that's okay. So I am giving them my opinion, which is what happens on the hotline sometimes. And then I think other questions, we still get a lot of compensation questions, which we've covered those about how the forms work. And I will say one of the biggest questions that I didn't cover when we talked about the three main types of compensation are if we're doing a cooperative compensation model and we have the compensation agreement, does it then also need to go in the purchase and sell agreement? So understanding how those forms work, the answer is no, assuming that the amount in the compensation agreement is sufficient for all involved, because the two forms will add together at closing. So, knowing that they work together and they're not duplications of each other. And that's a question get a lot. I think some people are interested in kind of the enforcement of the NAR settlement. And so obviously I'm directing them back to their local MLS who are in charge of that. And that's not my domain. I can tell them about it. But as far as enforcement, that goes back to the MLS.
Right. Well, I think that brings us actually to the end of our time. It's gone by awful fast.
Well, it's probably good for our listeners. It's not like a super exciting topic, even though it is very important. And I think just really wanting to share that, the benefit of the forms and sort of the protection that they are intended to provide in transactions and that they do provide in transactions. And so I think that when Laura comes and shares those like real life examples, that really puts it into perspective too of like, oh, I've been in a situation like that. And so it's nice to see that in real life.
Yeah, it should be a great program for her to be able to attend. So TNsights in July in Knoxville, and it's still plenty of time to register for that. So we're looking forward to having her come and share that information.
I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, I will have to say, I think you and Matt are starting to be my regulars on this podcast.
We're in a little competition, but I'm winning right now. So.
You are. And we're so glad that you're able to come back and share. And I know at the end of the year, there'll be more updates to talk about and many other things. So you'll have to come back.
Oh, I'll be back. I know. I feel like people probably see a lot of me, but I'm happy to do it.
Very excited
to talk to everyone and see everyone. And then I'm really excited about Asheville in the fall.
We are too. We were a little nervous because, they had another rock slide onto the road. And we were like, oh no, another hurdle, but it seems like they've gotten that cleared up. So we're happy about that.
It'll just be so beautiful that time of year.
Yeah. And nice to be able to go back and help with their economy. So numbers are looking good. So if you haven't registered, I hope that everybody will get registered soon.
Yeah. Lots of good programming there.
Yeah. Too. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap up. And thank you, Addison. I appreciate you coming and sharing about the forms and giving great advice as always.
Okay. Well, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us today on the RealTea podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues. Then visit tnrealtors.com to submit your questions and topics for future episodes of the RealTea podcast. Thanks for listening.